particularly in education, there are so many approaches coming from, unfortunately, schools of education that just sound so good that the researchers think they must be true, but they're not, and they're not borne out by good research. My name is Barbara Oakley. I'm a professor of engineering at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, and I teach, along with neuroscientist Terrence Sejnowski, the massive open online course Learning How to Learn. It is, as far as we know, the world's most popular massive open online course. In essence, it explores in a very practical way how can you learn more effectively and more efficiently, and people just love it. We have, nearly 3 million students so far, and it keeps going strong. The reason it's so successful is probably there are many reasons. I think first off, it's fresh information, and most people think, oh, learning, yeah, we've been told how to do this forever. But they don't know a lot of these insights, but they're presented in such an easy way that you think you already knew them, and you just kind of enjoy that whole process because it's so straightforward and yet so practical. It's edited in a way that people are riveted. There's always something a little unusual or a little funny, along with all the practical information that's soundly based on neuroscience. So all of these things, I think, combine together to make something that people just love. I think that data is profoundly important in education. The challenge is when you come to research involving education. In many fields, including the hard sciences, a lot of studies, when they've come to replicate those studies, they've found that they can't replicate these studies. So billions of dollars have been wasted in research that simply doesn't bear out when you try to replicate it. The field of social psychology is something like 30% of some of the gold standard studies actually prove out to be replicable. And I have to give a lot of credit to the field of social psychology because they're trying to replicate. The problem is that in the field of education, there's almost no replication going on. There's so many studies out there, lots of data, but you can make that data dance to whatever tune you want to, whatever you want to find. It's only when it's done in a proper scientific format where you can see, even if the identifying data has been removed from it, you actually can go and check that study yourself. And it's got a large number of participants, and it's been pre-registered, so you can't just sort of look at a bunch of data and say, oh yeah, if I look at it just this way, that study will come out true. Instead, you want to pre-register what you think is what your hypothesis is. A lot of this is not going on in education now, and so what you see is extremely charismatic researchers who've done a study that's not really a good, valid, replicated scientific study. And unfortunately, there's too much teaching and teaching about how people learn that's based on something that's not solid science at all. Universities can play an important role in developing education. But all too often, one must be careful because many university professors are really good people. They want to do something that's very helpful for others. They get something in mind that they think is helpful, and that's what they find in their studies. So I think that particularly in education, there are so many approaches coming from, unfortunately, schools of education that just sound so good that the researchers think they must be true, but they're not, and they're not borne out by good research. So I think that my hope is that the universities and schools of education in the future will move to something that's more evidence-based, and that's always a little tough. I mean, it's like this phrase that sounds really good, but what it often entails is doing large-scale studies that are replicated by other groups and don't just involve one charismatic professor kind of having maybe their friends also replicate their similar, somewhat small, or maybe it's a larger study, but it's actually, you can't check the data yourself, that kind of business. So I think there just needs to be a world of improvement in research, in education, and the whole world will benefit from that. The problem with European education is that it's being seduced by some ideas from the US that are not solidly based on science, on what we're learning from neuroscience. Instead, it's that kind of just sort of trendy, fatty idea of, oh, you don't need to actually learn information, you can always go look it up, which is not true at all and builds a poor foundation for learning. So I think that Europe needs to be a little careful and make sure that what they're teaching their teachers about how students learn is more soundly based on what is growing from cognitive psychology and neuroscience about issues such as the vital importance of retrieval practice in building sound networks and understanding of information. So what could be bad in education? It can be things like young children, they shouldn't be learning math because they should just be enjoying themselves all the time. Well, and children should be enjoying themselves quite a bit. But if you give them just a few minutes starting from early on, you can start developing the neural circuitry that allows them to more easily understand mathematics. If you take a typical student from China, bring them to the US at age 15, they would laugh at the math level in the US. Because, I mean, it is a joke. And part of it is the experts who say, oh, young people, oh, you don't want to cripple their minds by pushing them too hard or too early. Of course you don't want to push them too hard too early. But a few minutes here and there can make an enormous difference. And I know this because our own daughters, we did just a couple of minutes extra with math. And our older daughter, for example, was terrible at math. But that little bit of extra practice starting from when she was young, she became used to and comfortable with math, and now she just received her medical, or just finished her medical residency at Stanford. So here's this little girl who would have been, I'm not a math person, she really changed. I mean, even in the teaching of information, academia can teach at a level that is based on solid research that is what people really need. Whereas entrepreneurs, if they are teaching, it's often a skill, but it really doesn't have a good theoretical foundation a lot of times, and they don't really know enough to know what they're missing. So marrying the two together can be a valuable thing, but it can also be difficult because sometimes I say moving a university is like moving a cemetery. You can't expect any help from the inhabitants. There is a very real institutional inertia, and this is where I think entrepreneurs can kind of help bring them out of their shell and improve what they're doing as far as not only their research, but how they're teaching. I think that it should be sort of let these thousands of flowers bloom as far as virtual reality and various techniques for presenting material to students. We will see how the future plays out. One thing I'm very intently interested in is laboratories. How can, for example, an electrical engineering circuits lab be taught maybe using VR? I think that's a big holdup in the technical fields, is how do you teach this hands-on laboratory sorts of things? And I think that entrepreneurs will be a big help in that area. I absolutely am convinced that learning and technology and that combination is one of the hottest areas of the next decade. So if that's something that you're working in, you've got a really good future ahead of you.